Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening.
All right. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I am your host, Count David Agranoff, and I have gathered a panel of uber nerds to talk about Star Wars. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if we make references that don't make sense to the majority of the population, because we all come from a very small subculture of straight edge hardcore. So if we make references to Minor Threat or to Earth Crisis, or especially during the Tales of the Jedi discussion, I apologize ahead of time. However, this panel is one of a series that I've been doing. I've been doing these for Star Trek. Issa's been a part of all those. Ryan's been on for Strange New Worlds. And so we've been already talking about Star Trek, and I decided that it was time to talk about Star Wars because I like to nerd out on Star Wars as well. So I'm going to introduce my panel, and as I do so, they can give you their Star Wars background, how they got into it, and their favorite and least favorite films. I will start off myself. I'm David Agranoff, and your host here, and I got into Star Wars like when I was very, very little. Empire Strikes Back was the first I saw in the theater. It's the second movie I remember seeing in the theater to Star Trek, the motion picture. Or it might be the other way around because I'm not sure about the release order, but I think motion picture was first. But I have a very distinct memory of the audible gasp in the theater with the "I am your father" reveal. So I've been OG. I got out of school on the last day of third grade in Bloomington, Indiana, to go see Return of the Jedi at an early screening at the College Mall. I'm hardcore. My two favorite modern Star Wars films are Rogue One and Last Jedi. My least favorite is one that I hardly can believe exists and don't like to think of existing, and that would be Rise of Skywalker, which is the only Star Wars movie I have never seen a second time. Not even, I made it 30 minutes, that's it. Next I'm going to introduce Ryan J. Downey, who is the host of the Speak and Destroy podcast, among many others. That's a Metallica podcast. But he also does all kinds of pop culture stuff and is really going to be battling out for Star Wars nerd supreme here with the rest of the panel. Ryan, tell the folks your Star Wars story.
I actually tried to find my Yoda Pastor of Muppets hoodie to wear for this, but I couldn't find it, so I instead wore my Carrie Fisher on the set of the Blues Brothers.
Nice.
Which I actually just showed my kids last night, the Carrie Fisher episode of Saturday Night Live, featuring musical guests of the Blues Brothers from like 1978.
Wow.
Shout
deep
out to that. Deep cut and not a lot of laughs. The most of those sketches bombed, like with the audience. And she wasn't that known necessarily. I mean, you got to think 78. Star Wars was huge, of course, but there was just the one. Just the one movie. So yeah, Dave and I are both Generation X. We're the same age. We're from the same place, almost geographically, the same state anyway. So our experiences are markedly similar. The first one that I saw was actually the original 77 in the back of the family station wagon with wood panels on it at the drive-in. I have literally just like it's some of my earliest memories, and it's like flashes of stormtroopers. Like I don't remember much else, and I doubt it was actually 77. It was probably 78, maybe even 79, because I know Star Wars played for a long time because it was so massively popular. And then I have more vivid memories of Empire, and then definitely Jedi. And at that point, my brother and I were collecting all the toys and so on. Skipping ahead by a few decades, I saw Phantom Menace 7 times in the theater. When I moved to California about 20 years ago, I was the lead movie reporter for MTV News, and my first press screening as a member of the press that I ever went to was for Attack of the Clones. And I sat a couple seats away from George Lucas and right next to Master P. So got that going for me. It's a Star Wars memory. And then a big thing that I don't want to skip over in this little introduction is that I am a massive fan of the Clone Wars. The not to be confused with the theatrical version of a few episodes or the Tarkovsky thing, which was neat in its own way, but the series that ran on Cartoon Network for a long time, and once upon a time was the only Star Wars we were getting after the prequel trilogy. A lot of fans, casual fans, don't necessarily know this, but all of the extended universe stuff that was happening, all these books and all these comics and all this stuff that was out there, Lucas was more or less allowing it, but not really paying attention to it. And George Lucas has always said what was canon were at the time the 6 theatrical movies and the Clone Wars cartoon. And he had this guy Dave Filoni that was really his like understudy protege that he put. Yeah, I'm campaigning for Dave Filoni to become the Kevin Feige of Star Wars, which I think he's almost there. But he was the guy running that show with Lucas. The show's incredible. It really sort of fixes and makes a lot of sense of the prequels, and a lot of the things about the prequels that are maligned get kind of propped up by what they were doing on TV. And it's important to bring that up because that was the first Star Wars that I introduced my kids to. My daughter was very young when the Clone Wars cartoon was airing on TV. So that was her first Star Wars experience, was just the Clone Wars series. And I remember being with her in Target one day, and she saw a Chewbacca action figure, and she said, "Look, Daddy, it's Ahsoka's friend." Right, because her association with Chewbacca is a character that was on like a couple of episodes of a 7-season long series. And fast forward to when The Force Awakens comes out, and I had been waiting to show the theatrical movies to my kids as like some kind of event. While their uncle took my daughter to The Force Awakens unbeknownst to me. And so that was the first Star Wars movie she saw, having only seen the Clone Wars cartoon. And she was like, "Why are the clones the bad guys? What is happening?"
Oh man.
What is this movie? So yeah, and then to link up with Count Ags, Rogue One is definitely by far my unapologetic, unreserved, impassionately supported new Star Wars theatrical film that I really love. I like The Last Jedi, and I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go. And I did manage to see The Rise of Skywalker twice, and it was even worse the second time. And it was god awful the first time, even worse the second time. I feel like the one thing that Rise of Skywalker succeeded in was in uniting the Star Wars fandom and reviling
Disappointment. Yeah.
all factions of it. Whether they, half of them blamed it on the movie before, or half of them blamed it on the movie 2 movies before. Whatever you blamed it on, I think most fans could agree that it was a gigantic pile of shit. So that's it. That's what I got.
Issa, give the folks your Star Wars history.
Yeah, so there was a time when I would have been considered the biggest Star Wars nerd around, and that time was probably about 20 years ago or so. And since then, I would be considered a non-Star Wars nerd at all. I saw the movies in the theaters. I lived overseas and didn't see the Star Wars when it originally ran. I'm a few years older than these guys. But I did see it when they re-released it in the theaters before Empire Strikes Back came out. So I saw the original trilogy in theaters for Return of the Jedi. I totally woke up at like 3 a.m. and went to the movie theater and sat in line to get tickets, and then skipped school to watch the movie, of course. And I was a little bit like, okay, these Ewoks are kind of stupid, but I pretty much loved it at the time. I was like, there's no way they could take out the stormtroopers. Come on. But I was young enough that it was still like, okay, that's fine. I'll give you that, And then I read the book. I read a lot of the books. I read Splinter of the Mind's Eye and the Thrawn books later, the Heir to the Empire series. And then I kind of stopped. And then I watched the prequels when they came out, and the kind of a funny story about the first prequel. I just saw a friend at a wedding who I hadn't seen in a long time, and he was like, "Hey, when you saw, like, my band was going to tour in Europe, and we saw an early morning show the day of the episode 1 was released, and then we went straight to the airport and got on a plane. So we got to Europe and it hadn't been released there yet, and we were like the first people in Europe who had seen the movie, essentially. And some kid asked me how it was, and I was like, it was awesome. Right? Like, it wasn't my fault. I hadn't gotten a lot of sleep. I was getting ready for tour. It was early in the morning. And the lightsaber battle at the end is freaking maybe the best scene in any Star Wars movie. So with the memory of that hype in the audience, first day hype, fresh in my mind, I was like, this movie was great. And I told everyone how awesome it was. And so this kid came up to me, just a few weeks ago. He was like, when you told me episode 1 was awesome, were you messing with me? And I didn't, I had no memory of the whole experience of telling him that. But yeah, that was, and then, I watched the other prequel movies and I enjoyed them. I mean, I didn't really enjoy them, but they were like movies and they had lightsabers and whatever, right? I
will take Phantom Menace over Rise of Skywalker any day. Any day. But
I mean, it's hard. Yeah, I would too. But at the same time, without getting into the specifics, I think everyone has probably talked this to death, but I feel like Phantom Menace is mostly just silly, but the good parts are really, really good. And that's pretty much all the fighting. Like, if you cut out a lot of it and just kept the lightsaber fights, you'd have a pretty good movie. Whatever, the trade stuff, whatever, Anakin flying a ship, whatever, the pod racing, get rid of.
Can I say one thing quickly that I've realized in recent years? The prequel trilogy are good ideas executed poorly, and the sequel trilogy are no ideas executed well.
I'm going to disagree a little bit, because I think there were some really good parts of the new trilogy as well. I really like Kylo Ren. I understand why some people don't, but I thought he was a well done character. Like, I feel like that is how a young, whiny Sith would be, and it was sort of like the opposite of Luke Skywalker being a young, whiny kid. It was like the emo Sith or whatever. I enjoyed that. And like, the little things like the stuff between Rey and Ren were really good, I thought. So whatever, we won't have to get too sidetracked. But
I said executed well.
Yeah, okay. But I thought the ideas there were good too. But okay. But so I'll say one more thing, and then I'll get into what's different about me as a general Star Wars fan. But so then I haven't watched the Clone Wars. I did watch the new shows, and I was just very underwhelmed. I think what I like about Star Wars is maybe different from what most people like about Star Wars. I was never like a toy collector or anything like that. I never cared about the super minor characters. Like, I've never understood why Boba Fett is so popular. It's like the guy does nothing in any of the movies. He falls into a pit, but there's this like offline or whatever the word would be back in the 80s. There's this like non-movie thing where he has this whole backstory and all this stuff and whatever. And I feel like there are people who love Boba Fett because of stuff that wasn't in any of the movies. And I never really got that. What I like about Star Wars is kind of comes down to two things. I think the lightsaber battles are cool. And I think I've forgotten what the second thing was. I'm just going to admit it. I definitely think the lightsaber battles are cool. Oh, and I like the format that they kind of perfected in Return of the Jedi, where Act 3 is 3 different adventure series all edited together in a really, really exciting way. That those two things to me are what Star Wars is, and Han Solo. I feel like he really made Harrison Ford's character took Star Wars from just like some movie to like, this is amazing. And I think in a lot of the newer iterations and stories and whatever, they're just missing that, and it'll never be the same for me. And that might just me being old, but that's how I see it. So that's why I am the least big Star Wars fan on this panel now, even if I would have been a long time ago.
All right, Dawud, tell the folks who you are and give them your Star Wars cred. You, sir, are here because no one goes deeper in Star Wars nerddom to me and always if I make any reference to like the extended universe, like you appear like Candyman getting called to like correct me. No. Give everybody your Star Wars story and your cred.
All right, so I think I'm the youngest person on the panel. I was born after A New Hope came out. So I think my earliest memories of Star Wars, like memories, are Return of the Jedi, and probably like the Ewoks TV movies. Weirdly, I think I saw Star Wars. I think I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater when I was probably 3. And that's kind of mixed up with maybe seeing E.T. as well around the same time. So I remember more vividly like going to the toy store in the mall and getting a Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker figure. And it's just kind of being around because my older cousin was super into Star Wars. So my fandom didn't truly start until I was like 12, 13 years old, and I picked up a couple of expanded universe novels at a Sam's Club. So my Star Wars is almost more literary than it is filmic, because I read so many of the novels throughout junior high, high school, and then later on, like as it grew even beyond that, like as the prequel trilogy is coming out, there's tons of novels coming out. So I'm reading all that stuff, watching those movies in the theater, being disappointed by them in many ways, but having the books and comic books. So I go really deep into pre-Disney Star Wars, like lore like that. And I'm on board for post-Disney lore too. Like I really do. I'm the only person that likes Rise of Skywalker. I like the Emperor coming back. I like that because
like Rise of Skywalker, you're the one.
I like it, and I know that it's not good. Like, it's kind of like I like Batman v Superman, but it's not good.
I can respect that. There is a difference between best and favorites, and
right.
This is good, and I like this. They can be different.
I liked the way Rise of Skywalker starts picking on things that were in the old like expanded universe continuity, where the Emperor comes back, he tempts a Skywalker to the dark side, all that stuff. I enjoyed it. It's badly executed in terms of the narrative that they seem to have started with, and then sort of like they dropped him in there. I think they could have teased it a little more if they were actually planning on doing that. I don't think they were planning on that. I don't think they had a plan. But that's sort of my Star Wars pedigree. I have tons of collectibles. I have an extensive library of Star Wars novels, comic books, and I played most of the video games.
Right. And yeah, and you talk about, I know too that you've written and blogged and stuff about Jedi spirituality and how it connects to your life too.
Yeah.
The thing that you've done as well. So, that's part of one of the reasons why you're here. And certainly I like, as much as I can't stand Rise of Skywalker, if somebody's going to come on and defend it, I think that's great. Because I don't want everyone to just be an echo chamber, right?
I don't know if there's much of a defense for it. It's just I enjoy some of the things they put together there, but it's definitely like a couple of movies edited together.
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why I invited Issa is because I knew he was a somewhat tepid Star Wars fan, and I actually kind of wanted an excuse to force him to watch some of the cartoons as well.
Pun intended?
Yeah, no, it was intended. It was like, if I invite Issa on, I'll make him.
No, I'm saying you wanted
the force
him to watch. I'm sorry.
That was good. That was a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Issa.
Mind tricked him.
For the pity affirmation.
So, but anyways, this is a fun panel to get into Star Wars. So, as you can see, I gather nerds very carefully. And it is kind of cool too that we're 3/4 Indiana as well. So Indiana Origins.
I just want to say that I thought it was hilarious that Downey thought that he should say that you guys are from different parts of Indiana, like the rest of the country cares. Like, oh, I'm sorry, he's from northern Indiana, not southern.
True.
Yeah, it matters to us, but yeah.
Sure, I'm sure it does.
Okay.
I'm from Michiana.
I mean, we are representing three very different cultures within Indiana culture.
For sure.
I will take your word for it.
Hey, and how we got Star Wars toys was very different too, because I used to have to come to Ryan's neighborhood to get limited edition toys at the Greenwood Mall that we couldn't get in my town. So,
Okay.
Anyways,
I grew up in Washington, D.C., the birthplace of straight edge hardcore. You might have heard of it, cool. Indiana was cool too, I'm sure.
I'm sure. All right.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to talk about today, of course, is the Book of Boba Fett. We got to get into it a little bit. And of course, because we haven't done these panels before, if you want to throw in some thoughts about the Mandalorian and those kinds of things, feel free to do that. But I want to move on to Obi-Wan somewhat quick. My personal feeling, I have enjoyed the Mandalorian. I have liked the 2 seasons. I don't think it's quite the salvation of Star Wars that some people think it is. For the modern era, I'm more into the Rogue One and the Last Jedi. I love that Last Jedi tried to shake it up a bit. One thing that is funny on this panel, though, is that because of Ryan's position, he was able to see Last Jedi at its premiere. And I remember very distinctly, days before Last Jedi came out, Ryan Downey saying, "This is a good one. You're all gonna love it." And I mean, I did. Right?
I loved it as well. I thought it was the best of the new.
I was laughing out loud at the premiere in excitement over certain key moments, just because we had had that year in between, or however long it was, since The Force Awakens and all the mystery box bullshit, and people with all of their theories and trying to read the tea leaves and discern what's this mean and what's this going to happen. And everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but so much of the fandom went into The Last Jedi with they'd written the movie in their heads already. And then from the moment, we'd spent a year going what's going to happen when Luke takes the lightsaber? Takes it over his shoulder. I just started laughing because I was like, no way. And I had the same reaction to Snoke getting sliced in half. Who is Snoke? Where is he from? Blah, 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 blah. And this is the middle of the movie. There's oh, he's dead. Oh, Captain Phasma? We just threw her in a pit of lava. All those decisions, I was just this is amazing.
I mean,
he's going to subvert all of that bullshit and say I'm doing something different here, and you're going to have to just get on board or be real mad. And a lot of people
that year of speculation is what sank that movie with so much of the fandom.
It was too you can't change the story that much. The problem with the sequels, I guess we're calling them, the sequel trilogy, is that it just didn't have a plan. That was
no plan. And he painted whoever took the baton on the next one into a corner, because if Luke Skywalker was absent all those years, which was what was established in the Force Awakens.
JJ did with Force Awakens.
He has to have had a really good reason to be there. Whoever was getting the baton passed to them had the thankless task of coming up with a reason why Luke Skywalker wasn't a hero anymore.
Yeah, it's
I think
they set up all these mysteries and then there's zero payoff.
Yeah, because there was nothing to any of the mysteries. It was, what if I have a character that's like the Emperor? What if I have a character that's like Darth Vader? What if I have a character that's like Luke Skywalker? Those were the ideas. And then, how are they different? I don't know. It's a mystery. Somebody else will figure that out.
It didn't help that I think the production schedule, really jacked them up, because they're developing Last Jedi as Force Awakens is being made, and not with the space to course correct or reshuffle things to make things make more sense and work more cohesively. Yeah. Same thing happens with Episode 9. Whether you're talking Duel of the Fates or Rise of Skywalker, Duel of the Fates just gets scrapped because I don't really know why Trevorrow was canned or left.
because he had a
His
big movie
movie
come out
failed.
before and it flopped, and that's how that's the little amount of confidence in the decisions by committee that were happening, I think.
Yeah,
Well,
that's probably the fate of Rogue Squadron now too. At this point, with Patty Jenkins and Wonder Woman 2. But you've got only a year, and then Carrie Fisher dies, and like everything they had planned, sort of, is out the window at that point.
Well, right, because
that was the thing also with, I mean, you mentioned Batman v Superman. You just described Justice League also, because they're already pushing forward, making not one but two Justice League movies, and then Batman v Superman comes out, and everyone's like, "Wait, this is terrible." And the studio's like, "Uh-oh," and then you just end up with this garbled mess of literally like. I think film classes are someday going to study how much The Rise of Skywalker is one director arguing with another director that made the movie just before him. And what's fascinating about the theatrical cut of Justice League is it's literally two different, even more than Superman 2, which we were all too little to understand what had happened. You're literally just watching two different directors with two completely different tones and visions fight one another. And it's from that perspective, like, these kind of messes are fascinating, but it still doesn't get around the fact that we have an actual line of dialogue in the saga ending entry of the
I know where you're going.
Triple trilogies that is somehow Palpatine returned.
Right.
That's literally the line.
Yeah.
Well,
that's such a terrible line. Like, and they had sort of an explanation built in there, right? Like, they threw it away with Mary from Lord of the Rings being like, dark science, cloning.
They like cloning.
Sick stuff.
And this is where I'll bring it back to what I was saying about Dave Filoni and how what he was doing in the animated space was really fleshing out the prequels. I think he's attempting to do the same thing now with the sequel trilogy, because I think a lot of this story building with Grogu and with the remnants of the Empire and with the obvious cloning stuff that they're hinting at, I think he's going back and filling in that somehow Palpatine returned.
I would love for them to give him an animated series for the era to do that with.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that's one of the structural, like, I can't believe they did this things about Rise of Skywalker that just shows that they weren't thinking about it very, very well, is that Rise of Skywalker basically opens with the James Bond villain explaining the whole thing speech in the first scene, right? Like, where he's explaining to Kylo.
I believe the speech was actually heard in Fortnite.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that part.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He announces his return.
Movie, you had to find it in Fortnite.
Yeah, they tell you there's an ominous message in the crawl, right? And then that's in Fortnite, and they could have put that in the movie.
Right. Well, look, and this is all of us avoiding talking about Book of Boba Fett, partially, but and listen, I admit I have a little bit of bias because knowing Josh and having talked to him about what Josh was planning to do with his Boba Fett movie, which never ended up happening, and he was planning a trilogy, and basically, whether people agree with it or not, his plan was to remake the Dollars trilogy, the Clint Eastwood Dollars trilogy with Boba Fett, and the idea was
it's not intended as a trilogy and doesn't star the same character. Thank you.
Yeah, and but remaking like the vibe of it, and the idea is that you could make a cheap first one where it's just a character driven story about, like, here's this guy and he's manipulating all these people, which of course we know Fistful of Dollars is a remake of Yojimbo anyways, so it ties into Star Wars, and I thought it was a smart concept, and if he'd gotten to do it, I think it would have been better than Book of Boba Fett, but I'm biased. But that being said, the what we got is teased out or spun out of The Mandalorian, and more than any other show, the Book of Boba Fett, maybe of any show I've watched anywhere in television over the last couple of years, you can tell that it was made under pandemic restrictions, And a lot of shows hide that better than others. But Book of Boba Fett was terrible for that. You could tell that something was missing. The production was off. And director to director in Book of Boba Fett, some pulled it off better than others. And you could tell the skill of, and look, somebody who, Robert Rodriguez is a very accomplished director, but his episodes were kind of lazy in the direction, in my opinion. And for me, the only episode of Book of Boba Fett that really worked, besides the ones that were actually Mandalorian episodes, the Mandalorian episodes worked, and then the train heist episode worked, and then but the structure with the flashbacks was all messed up. And they really shouldn't have done it in flashbacks. They should have just started the story at the beginning, and I think it would have actually worked better if they started at the beginning and just told it, with no Bacta tanks, none of that. That's my.
They could have had a whole season 1 where it was just Boba and the Tusken tribe, and it would have worked really, really well. And they just jumbled it all up with the present day story, which felt like it didn't really go anywhere.
See, I felt the opposite. I was like, this Dances with Wolves crap is just so annoying. And I thought that was all just terrible. And I understand they were trying to give like a story to the character or whatever, but I would have much preferred if they'd only focused on the actual, like, I guess the real-time stuff and had a real story there instead of it just being, whatever it was. I mean, I just remember it being like a bunch of episodes of really boring stuff and then a dinosaur attacks everyone. Like it was like it was I was not very impressed with the series as a whole.
But
I did
at
like
least,
the train heist. That was cool.
At least the train heist and some of the Tusken stuff had some kinetic energy, whereas
Sure.
a lot of the scenes, the action scenes in the modern story, they were just kind of like, all right, Boba's walking around now.
No, totally. Yeah.
Now he's walking into somebody. Now the huts are being rolled up to him, and he's still walking. And
a lot of that was like, he's so dumb.
Yeah.
And the Vespene. Let's not
You've
forget.
been quiet on Book of Boba Fett, but what do you?
Yeah, I think it's. I completely agree with you. More so than anything else I can think of in recent memory, it feels like a pandemic TV series. It's like a season-long bottle episode of a show. Like I feel like we're in Jabba's. We're not even in Jabba's palace. We're in like a room or two of Jabba's palace, and then like walking down the same couple of streets for almost the whole show. It's interesting you guys all mentioned the train heist because I really liked that episode too. And I really liked the train heist in Solo. I thought that was the part that worked the best of the Solo movie. It's kind of weird that we have that many train heists that close together in live action Star Wars. A civilization that doesn't necessarily make sense for them to even have those trains. I don't know. But
trains,
here's my thing with Book of Boba Fett. I liked the casting, which I know not everyone loved. I thought the main cast anyway was fine. I think the episodes of The Mandalorian that clearly are just episodes of The Mandalorian were good, and felt very disconnected from the show. I will say from like a 30,000 foot view, and this will be interesting later on in a different episode if we reconvene to talk about Andor. I think that this show, more than any of the other Star Wars shows, this one and Kenobi, which we'll talk about, would have really benefited from the Netflix model. Because I agree with you about the structure of the flashbacks and the present day stuff and it being a mess. But I think had we had the opportunity to binge Book of Boba Fett, I think these shows, this Disney Plus release model, and I would say this about a lot of the Marvel shows, WandaVision being a big case in point. And some of it's my own fault.
No, I agree 100%.
Watches Easter egg videos and stuff like that. But it is suffering a bit from that year-long gap between Force Awakens and Last Jedi problem, where even just giving us a week between episodes is giving us a week to do all this headcanon and all these expectations and to look into, and was this pointing to this, and is this going to happen, and are we going to see this character in this show? And when all those things inevitably don't happen, it's just setting up like a bunch of disappointment for a lot of things that the show didn't necessarily owe us. And I think that had we had the opportunity to watch it like a Netflix show, we might view some of these shows differently because we wouldn't have been waiting a week in between to see like.
So I actually always binge these shows. I wait till the last episode is about to come out, and if I can time it right, I time it so I watch the last episode with everyone else so I don't get spoiled. And in my opinion, it makes all these shows that are just too little for bite-sized watching much better to watch it all at once. And by all at once, I mean I watch like maybe 2 episodes a day for every day.
Yeah, that's smart.
And it really makes it much more enjoyable for me. I hate waiting a week. I like can barely remember what happened in the last episode and stuff where, especially Book of Boba Fett, where so little happens. Like if you wrote out like what happened in the season, it was like Tusken tribe, some random bad guy bikers or whatever, and then a big fight for control of the city that was basically just a whole episode of fighting and running. It's almost like 3 bullet points, and so to drag that out over however, I don't know how many episodes it was, but like 8 or 10 or whatever episodes it was just too much. And so watching,
we learned very little about Boba Fett in a show called The Book of Boba Fett.
totally.
Whereas The Mandalorian, we spent so much time with The Mandalorian that character has become infinitely more fascinating than Boba Fett, who, as you mentioned, Issa, the fascination was really just he looked so cool.
Yeah,
And
cool toy.
We didn't have VHS. We didn't have, could go on YouTube and watch the Duel of the Fates fight right after it happened. So a lot of those theatrical experiences were colored by just these flashes we got. And people spent, how long in between Empire and Return of the Jedi wondering about Boba Fett and what his deal was.
I mean, I think the fascination with Boba Fett is driven by the toy. You also had the like toy that didn't release, the one with the like firing rocket pack. They were like that never came out. So you had a lackluster Boba Fett toy, but everyone was like, the one that we didn't get was amazing. And it drives the narrative of the character. Plus he was awesome as the only cool thing to come out of the holiday special. Right? And then he's like super silent dude in Empire, and for the 3 years leading up to Return of the Jedi, people were speculating about who this character was, and then he falls into a mouth in the sand because George was like, "He's not that cool, guys."
We can't wrap up talking about Book of Boba Fett without mentioning, to me, the most egregious thing about it, which is that there are some elements of it that just pull you right out of Star Wars so violently. One is the scooter gang, which I think was probably
mods.
Maligned and most rightfully maligned part of the show.
Awful.
And which ties into the scooter gang was this dude Thundercat. Now, we're all people with some connection to music. I didn't know who Thundercat was, but I knew as soon as he showed up, like, oh, that's somebody. And not only is he just playing himself in Star Wars, but they're playing it's a Thundercat song. And he shows up.
I didn't even notice that, and I don't even remember.
Well, it reminds me of how NSYNC almost showed up in the Battle of Geonosis. They actually filmed it because one of Lucas's kids was you guys all know this? One of Lucas's kids was like NSYNC fan. And so he brought NSYNC to set because they love Star Wars and his kids loved NSYNC. It was very much of the moment. And they're in the Battle of Geonosis in the arena, and it was just like, here's a lightsaber, do whatever you want, because we're just going to fill in, robots that you're slicing and dicing. And it exists. They filmed it.
That would have made what we've got in that scene even worse, because you can.
Right.
It bothers me every time I watch that movie just how bad the Jedi extras are at what they're supposed to be doing.
Because it was NSYNC apparently. So
but NSYNC and any random like Lucasfilm employee, I'm sure.
Well, someone
family member
appealed to reason at some point and got Lucas to cut it. I don't know if it was Rick McCallum or whoever, how the story goes, but I do know that somewhere in there, someone must have argued like, hey, having these dudes show up, would be like having Michael Jackson or I don't know, like somebody in the, you know what I mean, in the original trilogy that's going to date it to that like forever, if like John Denver was in the first Star Wars.
Or Jefferson Starship.
Like I'm like, how did we avoid that 20 years ago? And now we have some dude Thundercat showing up to his own song playing. Yeah,
he must be friends with Robert Rodriguez or something, right?
Yeah, but it's just, that sort of stuff. So he was the guy, Issa, that worked on the scooter gang, gave them like their little droid body parts and stuff. And Boba Fett brings Fennec Shand to him and is like, fix her. And he's like, Thundercat music's playing and he just looks like Thundercat and he's doing droid stuff.
My,
He's
my
Like, I got a robot
He's
hand.
going wicka 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 on her stomach.
right. My main question is, if you're in the scooter gang, let's say someone leaves the gang or whatever, like some new person joins, do they have to ride that color scooter? Like, what if they are used to riding like a green scooter? Now suddenly they're the yellow
Power Rangers. Yeah.
Everything on the Scooters gang was wrong. But I will. For me, another egregious thing with Book of Boba Fett was that so many really important things happened for the Mandalorian storyline. Grogu making his choice, Luke Skywalker returning, that had nothing to do with Book of Boba Fett.
Luke and Ahsoka hanging out, and Ahsoka like name dropping Anakin, and I mean, yeah, like these huge fan service moments that like.
That's honestly the episode I go to the most from that show.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like,
it's
I think it should have been The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Because like every season so far, Mandalorian is like the episodes are chapters, right? So it's supposed to be some kind of a visual book in some kind of way. So why not just subtitle a season that sort of takes place in between seasons 2 and 3 of Mandalorian as Book of Boba Fett, instead of saying like this is Boba Fett's thing.
Well, look,
instead of it just being like this is a filler, like.
I agree with you. Now, here's the thing, Downey. I mostly agree with you that Dave Filoni should be the Kevin Feige of Star Wars for the most part. I think his biggest fumble here was Book of Boba Fett. He was involved as a producer. I know it wasn't ultimately his decision, but he was involved in saying like, this is a good place to do this, or he was involved in overseeing this. And one thing that some Star Wars fans do is they give Dave Filoni, they make him sound like he can do no wrong, that he doesn't make mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes. Not everyone's going to be perfect. So I'm not anti-Dave Filoni for saying this. I just think that he made some mistakes here, or they all did, doing this show in this way and then unfolding in this way. Usually narrative choices, I agree with Dave Filoni because I think Clone Wars is super great. I think The Bad Batch is great. And
Rebels was great.
Yeah, and
that sequel trilogy era cartoon was almost unwatchable, and that was him. So
it's got some really cool stuff in it that needed more work.
Yeah, and I couldn't even watch it. It was hard to watch. I didn't finish it because it hurt my brain. It just didn't work. But so Book of Boba Fett. I mean, we don't have to go too much further on it other than to say that it was kind of, well, I guess we should talk about Luke Skywalker because Luke Skywalker is important there. Everybody saw it coming for a little bit. The fan theories were out there, part of that whole thing of the week leading up. I assumed that was going to happen. I didn't personally take me by surprise. Now, one of the things about Last Jedi is you have the fans that were upset that Luke didn't take on the whole First Order with his lightsaber. And so this is a little bit of fan service.
Which he sort of did, but didn't, which was awesome. Sorry.
Yeah. I personally like what he did in Last Jedi better because it's more fitting with his character, the guy who threw away his lightsaber at the end of Return of the Jedi. So Last Jedi makes more sense with Luke's character. Although for, in those in-between years, I'm sure he's doing Jedi things, and I'm fine with it. I just think that there was a degree that we got a little bit of fans being like, that's a Luke Skywalker we deserved. And that was a little bit much for me. I don't know how anybody else did that. But that being said, and I'm not personally sure. We'll have to see how it plays out in Mandalorian season 3. But at the time, I don't know how anybody else felt, but I actually was kind of upset that Grogu chose Mando. I actually thought it was I personally was hoping in that scene that Grogu would choose to stay with Luke, at least for a while, because we know I don't want Grogu getting killed by Kylo. But I was just
I think it was lazy for those two reasons. I think because we throw around the phrase fan service a lot. I think it was really lazy fan service to have him choose Mando because that gets rid of the oh no, does he die in the Jedi Temple that everyone's worried about from the moment we saw.
Yeah.
And it what ostensibly works the best about the show that everybody loves, which is the adventures of Lone Wolf and Cub. And to me, it's sort of a lazy, it's a very TV thing though, right? How you always have to kind of reset the board and it has to go back to, Lois Lane always eventually forgets that she knows Clark Kent is Superman somehow, because things got to kind of go back to and that's the setup of the show, is him taking care of this kid, and they would have been challenged to take the show in a different direction without Grogu, and obviously they weren't.
Well, and I'm
ready
not
to try
saying
that.
I'm not saying you couldn't bring Grogu back in, but I think it would have been a more interesting thing character-wise if Grogu made that choice and eventually Mando had to find him again, or Luke couldn't handle Grogu or something happened where, there's plenty of story things they could have done. I just personally was hoping Grogu would make the choice to train as a Jedi. That's all.
I have a very unpopular Ahsoka opinion that relates to this, which is that she's one of, if not my number one favorite Jedi character, or possibly Star Wars character in all of Star Wars. Amazing. I think that they really cheated twice. I'll tell you how. Once is that, spoiler alert, that she leaves the Jedi Order towards the end of the Clone Wars, because the whole time you're watching the show, as you're getting attached to these characters, you're also thinking in the back of your mind, like, wow, she's
done.
She's not around in the original trilogy, and we all know what happens to the Jedi. So wow, this is dark. And
yeah, I mean, it's even worse because you're like, she's not even in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, exactly. And the same, and the same thing with Rex and a lot of the clones that you get attached to, is you also think like, man, these guys are all gonna break bad before this is done. This is crazy. So I think it was a cheat having her leave the Jedi Order so she could conveniently not get killed. And then when they had the chance to to do Rebels, the bigger cheat I thought was it's like they just put her in Rebels because she's so popular, right? And I love seeing her. I am served by that fan service because I'm like, yay, Ahsoka. But the biggest cheat, I think, and it's a real story problem in my opinion, she should have died in Twilight of the Apprentice. When they're on Malachor, they're in the Sith Temple, she's fighting Vader. She says, I won't leave you. He says, then you will die. And it's this great emotion. It's one of the best moments in Star Wars. And the temple collapses and we only see Vader come out. That should have been it. She should have died. And it was cheating. And it's literally retconning her death as a way to go like, yay, now we can have her show up in Mandalorian, and now she has her own show and her adventures continue. And it's like, man, you gotta close the loop on some of these stories, I think, for them.
See, I didn't even know who she was until The Mandalorian. So, maybe they're just doing it fan service for people like me.
Well, I can say 50,000 feet view. I had a friend who asked me about 5 or 6 episodes into the first season of Mando, who he was watching it, and he asked me if I was watching it, and he told me he loved it. And then he said in a unironic way, so this guy's like, he's Boba Fett, right? This is a show about Boba Fett. We also got to remember that's most people. Someone who had watched half of the first season of Mandalorian and thought he was watching a show about Boba Fett.
Right. Well, he doesn't take the helmet off.
And not an idiot, just somebody who just kind of likes Star Wars and people were watching and started watching.
I sort of agree with you, Ryan, that would have been a good end to the Ahsoka storyline, but I'm also kind of glad we're getting to see Rosario Dawson play her. And
I know, but somehow Ahsoka's alive, Ezra's alive,
the Emperor's alive.
The Emperor's alive somehow.
Can I jump ahead then and ask a question? What was the scene where Captain Rex is like, I hope all that training pays off, and they walk into the room full of Clone War people?
So that is right at the time of Order 66.
Okay,
that brings us into a moment in the last
Clone
episode
Wars.
of the Clone Wars, where where Ahsoka has to fight all those clones, including Jesse, who's one of the clone leading all the clones she's fighting is Jesse, who's one of the ones in that training exercise.
And what they're setting up is that Anakin gave her the training that allowed her to survive Order 66.
To survive in a way that other Jedi didn't, because we saw in Revenge of the Sith a lot of Jedi die from a bunch of clones shooting at them.
Yeah, like Anakin gave her the key to stop the thing that he unleashed, basically.
Yeah.
That was one of the weaker things about Star Wars in general for me, was that the Jedi were just so easy to kill. I was just like a little
It
disappointed.
didn't bother me so much, but what's bothered me about some of this, you mentioned the Star Wars games earlier. The only one I've ever played is Fallen Order, which I loved. But the more we get these characters like Cal Kestis, and at least Kanan dies in Rebels. Spoiler.
Yeah.
The more we have Ezra, the more we have Ahsoka. And I understand the need to do it, but it really undermines Luke Skywalker being a new hope, and that boy was our only hope. And it's like, well, no, now we know there's all kinds of little pockets of amazing, talented, well-meaning, heroic Jedi.
Maybe Yoda and Ben just didn't respect all those other Jedi, though. Maybe.
Well, they did.
It's weird, right? Because
Teenager who had never done anything. It really, much like the sequel trilogy itself undoes.
But that's the whole, my biggest complaint about the prequels was that it ends in a way that just makes no sense. And I've said this before, and I apologize, David, if I'm repeating myself, but it ends with like the bad guys have just taken over. Yoda has just fought Palpatine and kind of lost, but it wasn't like horrible. He lost. And so instead of being like, all right, let's remarshal our forces and attack him again, they're like, let's go hide in the swamp for 20 years and let some kid take care of it later. It makes no sense. They should have continued the fight right away. And so that's now you find out that there were all these other Jedi just scattered around. I
don't want to overstate that. When I say all these other Jedi, it's like 5.
Well, okay, fair enough. But
that we know of.
I'm just saying it kind of undermines the idea of life.
If Yoda could almost defeat Palpatine, why couldn't the 5 remaining Jedi all get together?
Well, first of all, he only knew about Obi-Wan. First off. Second off, within this universe, I think it makes sense because Order 66 was a sneak attack. So here's the thing: is that the Jedi were prepared for it. They thought they didn't see it coming, and so there's the shock of it. And I would think that Yoda and Obi-Wan, they didn't know. And there was, whether you're talking about Bail Organa or you're talking about Mon Mothma, none of these people were prepared.
Well, but hold on. Senator Organa just met Ahsoka at the funeral, we just found out. So he knew she was...
Well, they knew each other before.
They've met in Clone Wars.
No, but that was the timing. That was like the end of episode 1 after the funeral. Or no, the end of episode 3 after the funeral, right?
Not to put real life politics into this, but imagine on January 6th saying, why didn't they just put Trump in jail? Right? Why didn't they just do that?
Well, that is a perfectly logical question.
It is a perfectly logical question, but at the same time, there's a lot going on and you're not in the moment. Everyone's shuffling and trying to figure out what's going on. And this is a galaxy-wide thing where thousands of Jedi are dying. So story-wise, I think it makes sense. And
I think what you mean is, why didn't they put Biden in jail? Because he's the emperor taking over with Order 66.
Right.
And all the
Brandon, right?
Trying to...
Let's go Palpatine, right?
Yeah, jumping a little ahead, I guess, because we haven't gotten to Tales of the Jedi yet, but they do see the how Order 66 works in one of the Dooku episodes.
Yeah, I thought that was a little heavy-handed. The only
I thought it worked.
Kill a Jedi is if someone that they think is a friend shoots them in the back.
Basically.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's move on from Book of Boba Fett. And
were we still talking about Book of Boba Fett? I didn't.
No,
realize.
we weren't.
Sort of.
That sums up Book of Boba Fett so well. It was like the Mandalorian and Luke Skywalker and whatever, and the actual Boba Fett stuff was pretty boring.
Yeah, for real. And for a guy who's basically built around that he's no good to me dead, there's just only so much you could do with Boba Fett. But
they just didn't let him do anything in his own show.
No.
Too much.
Fennec Shand does all the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is kind of true. So the thing with Obi-Wan, and I got to admit to some bias here. First of all, Obi-Wan is my favorite Star Wars character, hands down. I'm a huge fan of Ewan McGregor. I think him coming off doing the Halston miniseries to doing this is a incredible gear shifting of acting. Like, and I really impressed with that. There are pluses and minuses, but I've watched Obi-Wan all the way through twice. The second time I watched it was on my laptop on the sleeping car on taking the train to Portland, which was really fun. But the thing about Obi-Wan for me was I'm one of those people who at the same time would say, I don't know that we need this story, but I really want it because I like Obi-Wan. And afterwards, there are some production choices that I'm not so sure about. Mainly, I think it should have been a movie, and it should have been in theaters. It should have been one story, 1 2-hour story. However, I really appreciate that Obi-Wan had an extremely useful arc for that character to get him from A to B, because the guy who went to Tatooine is not the same guy that Luke Skywalker met. And I think they did a really smart job of putting him through the cycles of grief to make it a worthwhile story. And they paid off most of the scenes. Whereas I was like, I don't know if I need to see, like when they first said that Vader was going to be in it and Hayden Christensen was going to be in it, I was kind of against that idea in my head because I thought there's other Obi-Wan stories you could tell. And I was kind of against it, but then I think they actually paid it off. Now, that's just my overarching view. Starting with Downey, what were your feelings on Obi-Wan overall?
Extremely similar. I love the character. I love Ewan McGregor's portrayal. I love the character in the Clone Wars. I thought he was far and away the most redeeming thing about the prequels. I was excited for this show. And like you, I was apprehensive about introducing Vader to it. Nothing to do with Hayden Christensen. I was actually happy for him as an actor to have a chance to, another bite of the apple. But I just thought, is this going to undermine that last meeting that they have, which until now we thought was their first meeting since Revenge of the Sith. But I actually thought that it more than earned itself as being meaningful story-wise. I agree with you about Obi-Wan's arc. And most importantly, I agree with you that whether it was released theatrically or not, because I do feel like there's lower stakes to what's happening on TV, which I think is allowing them to be better. And you're not getting decisions like, look, Rogue One turned out great, but it was very similar to Rise of Skywalker in that it was like, editors came in that were essentially another director took over who's not credited. And, there were reshoots and that movie Solo, the third in the sequel trilogy, all of those were like messes with like decisions being made and changed as they went. And I think the TV shows aren't really suffering from that.
That is a very good point.
Like, oh, this is TV. It doesn't have to make $1 billion to be considered a success. Having said that, I think story-wise, from a story perspective, yes, 6 hours of Obi-Wan that we got would work great as a 2-hour movie. And there's actually someone who, right after the finale aired, did like a fan edit that was up on YouTube almost immediately, where they took all 6 hours and trimmed it down into a tight, I think it's like 2-hour, 20-minute movie. They actually even added some things, but for the most part, it was subtracting. And at like anyone, I watched it, and there were like some choices I would have made differently than they made. But overall, I thought they did a really great job. And that's exactly what it needed. And I didn't, the stuff that I would lose, I didn't necessarily even dislike. I just don't think that it needed it. And much like Book of Boba Fett, if it says Boba Fett on the tin, if that's what you think that you're getting, and then it's like all this other stuff and all these other people, and it's Mandalorian episodes dropped in, as great as those episodes were, those moments were, this almost suffered from the same thing, where it was ostensibly a show about Obi-Wan, but instead we spent a lot of time getting to know other rebels. We obviously spent a lot of time with the one Inquisitor. I didn't hate her character. I didn't hate her performance. I did hate that so much time was spent telling her story in a show about Obi-Wan. And I think, that's a lot of stuff that could have been tightened. I don't think you have to lose too much of what's in there to still be able to tell it. There's just a lot of filler, but overall I liked it, and like you, I watched it twice, and I thought it was well done. I thought the Kathleen Kennedy was talking about the rematch of the century, and I just remember thinking, like, no, there's no like in between rematch. But I also came to understand how, if you are Disney, if you're Lucasfilm and you're making an Obi-Wan series and there's no Vader at all, that is kind of weird in its own way. And I thought that they really figured out a way to earn it and for it to make sense and for it to really bridge the gap between where the relationship between those two characters was left and where it picks back up in A New Hope. I thought it really does bridge that gap really well.
Okay, Issa.
I liked it fine. It was the best of the TV shows to me. I liked it more than I liked Mandalorian. I'm one of the dissenting voices who thinks Mandalorian's fine and entertaining, but it's not really as great as everyone seems to think it is, at least to me. And mostly that's because of lack of lightsabers and really exciting moments.
You got the dark saber though.
Yeah, and I have to say that I love that he doesn't know how to use the dark saber. Like, I feel like in most stories, someone finds the magic sword and is instantly the best swordsman on the planet. I like that he like cuts himself with it or whatever, which is stuff that would totally happen if a real person found a blade like that. But yeah, I like it. It's like a TV show. It's not my favorite TV show I've ever seen. And it's sort of like, if I'd never seen it, I wouldn't feel like I was really missing anything. And that's a little disappointing for something Star Wars. Like again, going back to what I said originally, I picture Star Wars like being on the edge of my seat in the theater with a whole theater full of people also on the edge of their seat cheering. And you don't get that from these TV shows. So, that's a little unfair. Is that unfair? Yes, probably. And it's not just Star Wars. I feel the same way about the Marvel shows and pretty much all these other TV shows. Most of them are a little bit underwhelming and probably would have been better as a movie. I think there's this, I'll try to get back to Obi-Wan, but there's this old thing in movie making that your movie should be about like the most important moment in this character's life, like to give it stakes. It has to be like, that's sort of like the film school thing. Like, this should be the most important thing that's ever happened to this character. And it should be really interesting. And I think in these situations, again, both Marvel, Star Wars, whatever, you can't tell 10 of the most interesting moments of a person's life very easily, So you end up having these like disappointingly low stake stories. And some of Obi-Wan ended up being great. I did enjoy the Vader stuff. But it was also very like, you know what's going to happen. There's no big surprises there. And it was introducing a lot of new characters that I wasn't really that excited to be introduced. I easily could see a 2-hour Obi-Wan movie that was very similar to what happened, but just had more stakes and was more exciting and felt closer to like what Star Wars should feel like to me. I'm kind of nitpicking. Like, it was a fine TV show without, anything else to judge it against. I enjoyed watching it. So
well, and they cast the wrong member of Fear to be a villain in it. If there was ever a time for leaving,
I totally forgot about that. If we're gonna get into nitpick territory, I somehow had blocked out of my mind that horrific chase scene of young Leia and Flea's gang. That was embarrassing.
What actually ended up blowing my mind about that chase scene, because I thought that was one of those scenes that showed the limitations of the volume.
Yeah.
Right. But apparently that was shot outdoors.
Yeah,
that's showing make it even worse.
It's showing the limitations of like trying to have grown adults chasing a child with very little.
A child.
Yeah.
I should have added that I did
that
really
would have been in Beastmaster or like any kind of like sci-fi low budget TV fare that was being churned out. Like, it was very much an action scene from one of those.
I should add that I really did enjoy young Leia. She was great.
Oh, she's wonderful.
Yeah. The predictable people who would predictably hate a character like that did online, but sure, I thought she was awesome. I also thought that was, prequel. One of the problems with prequel storytelling in general is the inevitability of them, and that's not a Star Wars problem. That's just prequels in general, is that where it's all headed. Having said that, I thought that was one surprising thing that we got was like, oh, I didn't know there was going to be a young Leia component to this show. And that was a nice surprise, and I thought a well done surprise.
And for all the people that complained about it, I actually think that if you go back and watch A New Hope now, Help Me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, You're My Only Hope has so much more strength now after this show. Knowing the secret that they kept and that knowing that they knew each other. And I don't think that it breaks the canon there. I think, no. And
really nice. I also think my last funny thing about Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker got so screwed over. Like Leia gets to grow up in this palace. She's like a senator's kid, and like Luke is like on this farm drinking blue milk or whatever. You know what I mean?
Like a farm, just a desert farm.
Yeah, go farm some water, Luke.
Oyster farming. Yeah.
I don't think Leia ever got to go to Tashi Station to get power converters.
No,
that's true. But she also didn't have to deal with a droid with a bad motivator. So
exactly.
Dawud.
She didn't get crappy nicknames like Wormy.
Dawud, your thoughts on Obi-Wan?
Well, like you guys, my favorite character in Star Wars is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and my whole look is Obi-Wan Kenobi here. And I was really kind of trepidatious about taking him off Tatooine. And when it was originally supposed to be a movie, my thinking was, don't do a big adventure like in real time. I was thinking like do kind of a Last Temptation of Christ movie for him. Have it be all about his spiritual journey, awakening, how he resolves all these issues within. So he's the whole time, in my mind, he would be in his cave or in his hut, essentially meditating. And all of the action would be visions and flashbacks. And I think you could still have that confrontation with Vader or Anakin or some kind of in between of Vader and Anakin in the spiritual realm. But I like what we got. And I think some of this stuff works better over the 6 episodes. I'm not sure that I would want him off planet in like a 2-hour movie with a chase with Leia. I feel like the adventure with Leia works a little better, being able to breathe over multiple planets and multiple episodes. Some of the other elements that make it so they had to do, it's weird to me that they have, some of the episodes are pretty short, and they're still going to the pool of like developing other characters besides Obi-Wan and his coping with his grief and loss of faith. And I liked Reva.
Yeah.
But
does it
go ahead, Dave.
not bother anyone that Obi-Wan lost the fight and then just sat around for 20 years waiting for freaking Luke to grow up and take over the fight? That just insane. It's ridiculous.
Here's where it makes sense in light of the prequels and the mythology, is that Anakin's space Jesus. So of course the son of space just is a big deal, right?
Okay,
like
that's a good, sure.
So in the mythology of Star Wars, it works. If we had gone by what we all kind of assumed it was before there were prequels and before Anakin becomes the chosen one, right? It makes a little less sense unless there's just overwhelming might and these really are the last guys.
Yeah. No, okay, that makes more sense. I would also say that, David, as much as it makes Help Me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, You're My Only Hope better, it makes there's also another worse, because it's like you'd think after what they'd been, David, we lost your mic, I think. But after what he's been through with Leia, why would they even think Luke was the first choice? This little resourceful Leia can kick some ass, like
Jedi sexism, bro.
I was just about to say, I felt like and maybe I'm reading too many layers into it, but I felt like there was a nice, and maybe it's retconning, but there was thematically something to say about sexism in here, where it was, oh, Leia's fine, and the fancy palace being raised by politicians. I got to stay here and look after Luke. That's the important thing, and that he has to be sort of he has to be like badgered into. He has to be convinced to leave the planet to go help Leia. And I think that's. I agree. I thought that was another, much like confronting Vader again, I was like, oh, it seems kind of not the right thing to have him leave Tatooine. Like, how could you ever get him off there? And I thought that they came up with a compelling story reason.
It makes sense.
Having Leia be in danger was really the only other thing you could come up with that would get him to leave. And it also adds some urgency to him wanting to go get her and get right back. You know.
So going back to the like, why didn't they choose Leia thing? There's a short story collection. I think it's the 40th anniversary short story collection called A Certain Point of View, Star Wars, A Certain Point of View. There's a story in that one where it's I think it's the very last story in that book, but it goes to Yoda on Dagobah.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
No, not that one. There's another one. I can't remember who it's by, but it's actually about Yoda on Dagobah, and he senses Obi-Wan dying. He senses Obi-Wan becoming one with the Force, and Yoda. I think he has a conversation with Obi-Wan in that one, but he wanted to train Leia. He was like, Leia's going to be the one. Something about her, that's who Yoda figured would be the student. But Obi-Wan dies, and he's like, no, it's Luke. Like, I've started Luke on the path, and so you got to take Luke. And Yoda's like, but he's too much like Anakin. Like, we should teach the sister.
That's some good retconning.
Yeah, and I mean, it's in it like essentially an obscure story.
All right,
well, it's all hampered, right, by Lucas going into his original trilogy without a real plan, except for A New Hope.
He did have midi-chlorians in his original notes.
Yes,
he had Anakin Starkiller there.
Yeah, I'm glad, by the way, that you are such a student of the books and everything, because I think first of all, Count Aggs has assembled a great collection of people here that have different. Not just differing levels of fandom, but differing like experiences with it and whatever, because this will be a great segue into Tales of the Jedi, because I'm endlessly fascinated to know you as someone who's deeper into that, the literature side and the canon. There's some controversy about the Ahsoka stuff.
We'll get there. You're talking about the Ahsoka novel. Yes. We'll get there. I want to talk about some favorite moments from the Obi-Wan series for me. Okay, so if you hadn't figured it out, we took a bathroom break, but we're a bunch of old dudes. So anyways, my favorite moments from Obi-Wan. I want to talk about favorite moments from Obi-Wan as a show. And I gotta say, like, for me, one of my absolute favorite moments in the show, I really liked the character of Tala, the one that was the double agent for the Empire. And when she sacrificed herself and said, "May the Force be with you" to Obi-Wan right before she blew herself up to save everyone, I literally got emotional. Like, I got teary-eyed watching that scene. I'm not even gonna, I don't care what anyone thinks. Like, that moment was so powerful for me. It was one of the best of the show, partially because Obi-Wan had struggled with his connection to the Force. He'd cut himself off from the Force and was going through the cycles of grief. So in that moment, it was so powerful. And I thought that was really great. That was one of my favorite moments. Another one of my favorite moments was, of course, when Obi-Wan like basically gets the best of Anakin and knocks off half of his mask, and we get to hear Hayden Christensen's voice. And we got to see that. That was such a powerful scene. And Anakin saying, "You didn't kill Anakin, I did." And Obi-Wan, just the look of horror on Obi-Wan's face of like, and it all tied into that scene where he talks in New Hope about, he killed your father. From a certain point of view, that whole thing tied together really well for Star Wars fans. Those some of my favorite moments. I really loved Obi-Wan talking to Leia about, oh, you got that from your mother, you got that from your father, tying that to all of it. Ice Cube's son being a rebel leader is pretty cool. But and obviously the whole, I love strategy and space battles and all that. So that whole episode where Obi-Wan has to outsmart Anakin to get the rebels out that scratched my Wrath of Khan itch.
I love that for the same reason too. Very Wrath of Khan, and also when you have this big grand strategy, but it's being played out with the personalities, because that's purely Obi-Wan knowing Anakin so well that he can manipulate that situation. And it's also a fault of dictatorships, because you see the Grand Inquisitor standing next to Vader being like, this is real dumb, but he can't do it.
Yeah. And I love, as a Quentin Tarantino fan, as anybody, and if you read my work, my fiction, you'll see that a lot of the suspense moments happen in dialogue. And I love when suspense, tension, and story moves forward in dialogue. And the scene where Obi-Wan says to Reva, I'm bringing him to you. I didn't turn myself in. I'm bringing him to you. That whole thing, like the fact that it all happened in story and in dialogue, chef's kiss. And I personally thought that was all great stuff. And yes, there was the bad Leia chase scene, and there was some of the goofy stuff in the Blade Runner planet. Not great, not perfect, but
I liked Blade Runner Planet. I liked Homeless Clone Trooper too. That was pretty great.
Homeless Clone Trooper was great, and that really tied in well if you're a Clone Wars watcher. But overall, my thoughts on Obi-Wan as a series it was not perfect, but I loved it, and I'm super happy that it was there, that it happened, that we got an Obi-Wan series. So any other favorite moments from anybody else?
I really liked Leia being like old enough and smart enough to figure out to ask questions about her parents. Like that seemed very, very realistic.
Yeah, I like that Leia is conscious of the fact that she's adopted.
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, that was I hadn't even thought about that. Totally. I like that without Twilight of the Apprentice, we would have never gotten a live action scene where Vader's mask is broken and the James Earl Jones voice is intermingled with the Anakin voice. That was for you, Issa. That mirrored almost shot for shot a scene that happens in Star Wars Rebels, where
the opposite side of the mask, and that was really smart.
Opposite side of the mask, which was also smart. Where
Ahsoka, Ahsoka did.
Yeah, I think it's a really. Yeah.
And you hear.
I think it's a really interesting thing, right? Where people pointed out since, like, Obi-Wan takes this side, Ahsoka takes this side. Only Luke can get the whole thing off.
Yeah. Yes, and there's no way that's an accident. And also that it speaks to the importance of the characters of Anakin's master and then also his apprentice, that each of them are the people prior to Luke that get closest.
Yeah.
So, like, getting to the Anakin underneath Vader, literally and figuratively, but don't get all the way, because he's still he doubles down with both of them and is like, no, I'm going to kill you.
Right. And that's one of the things that the prequels actually and all this stuff helps with, is that when I was a kid and I watched Return of the Jedi and Luke's like, there's good in you, I'm like, you're an idiot. There's no good in that guy. Like, what are you doing? That's never going to work. And when you watch the prequels, it changes everything for Return of the Jedi, and it makes the whole last scene with Luke like a totally...
And really the Clone Wars, because we really get to know Anakin over several seasons of the Clone Wars in a way that the prequels just did not provide.
Right.
We got very little of that heroic Anakin, and the Clone Wars don't cheap out on, especially towards the end. We see some darkness, and we see him do things out of anger, and we see him take revenge and things like that. But for most of that series, Issa, we get the heroic. He's unorthodox.
We're just speaking to Issa now.
Whatever.
Yeah, I haven't seen all these cartoons.
But he's we get the heroic Anakin, where it makes, instead of one of the criticisms of the prequels is show don't tell, right? Because I agree with you, David, about tension and story and everything happening in dialogue. But the other side of that coin is the show don't tell, right? Where one of the criticisms of the prequels is you get a scene in the elevator of Obi-Wan and Anakin going like, hey, remember all those adventures we were on? Now we bonded.
Okay,
best
yeah, that's a
friends.
bit much. I agree.
Yeah, and it's like the cartoon actually goes back and is like, let's actually show this. Let's actually not just have a couple lines of dialogue telling us that these two are close. Let's actually show them becoming close over the course of a war.
Right.
Yeah.
He was like a brother.
Obi-Wan moments was the echoing of that great scene from Rebels and the mirroring and all of that. And it was just cool in live action to because it was like, what's the point of sticking Hayden in the suit if he's not the voice?
Yeah.
And if he's probably not in the suit most of the time anyway, and then getting him in the tank, getting him with the flashbacks, and then getting him there was just great. And for him as an actor, you know, somebody who like Ahmed Best, was bullied by the public for a bunch of things that weren't necessarily their fault.
100% weren't their fault. I don't even think you could say weren't necessarily, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Hayden had to deliver stilted dialogue and was told to deliver it the way that he did by George. Like, that was what he wanted. And you feel bad for both Anakin actors, right? Because like Jake Lloyd really gets demolished by crappy fandom and other kids.
Jake
Keep
Lloyd
talking, guy.
Huh?
You mean Jake Lloyd, the actor from Indiana?
Is he from Indiana?
I don't think he was born there, but I think he went to high school there.
Really? So it was high school kids in Indiana that pestered him until
he's got a Hoosier connection somewhere. Okay, so he was born in Colorado. There it is. Lloyd attended Carmel High School in Carmel, Indiana.
Oh wow! Yeah, Kylo Ren is from Mishawaka.
That's right. I did know that. And Jake Lloyd went to Issa. I'm going to tie this together. Issa went to the same high school as several members of Split Lip. Did you know that, Count Eggs?
No, I did not.
Jake Lloyd went to Carmel High School.
That is actually not well. You know, look, Jake Lloyd. You know, he was not only Anakin; he was in Jingle All the Way.
That's right.
That's right. Which is the best Schwarzenegger comedy. And I will stand by that, and not just because it was a running joke on Conan O'Brien, but it just was truly funny. No, I did not know Jake Lloyd went to Carmel High. I will keep my opinions.
Yeah, he wasn't born in Indiana, but he spent his formative years.
So for people at home not familiar with Indiana, from what I've heard about Carmel High, it's sort of like where the bad kids from Pretty in Pink went to high school or something. Like that's yeah.
When you said bad kids, I was going to say no, and then when it was definitely the rich kid.
James Spader in Pretty in Pink.
Right, sure.
Yeah, that side of the tracks. But enough on Indiana.
And where I grew up was more of the Judd Nelson in Breakfast Club.
That is absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah. No, which is why I always was friends with the South Side hardcore kids at Indianapolis. Like, I gotta say. And then there was the one bridge, which was Reese. But yeah. So on back to Star Wars. The fun thing on Obi-Wan 2 is that I feel like in a lot of ways it connected the tissue with the cartoons quite a bit. With Clone Wars and live action. So it wasn't just connecting the prequels, but it was connecting all those, and it's cool because Dave Filoni I don't think he was directly involved with the show at all. So but they gave respect to the canon in that regard. And I think
my only fanboy complaint there is when we knew we were going to get flashbacks, I really wanted. I bet you guys both know what I'm going to say. I really wanted Obi and Anakin in the Clone Wars era.
Yeah, I would have loved that. I would have loved that so much.
I wanted a flashback with Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars armor.
I think wouldn't the Attack of the Clones era flashback been just a little bit better if it was a Clone Wars era flashback?
Yeah.
I mean, it was cool, but I think instead of it being Anakin as his Padawan, as his close friend, when they're still on good terms.
Right. You know, something we totally skipped over is we did get a great live action Order 66.
Oh
It's
yeah.
true.
which I
At the
think might be the
beginning.
first. We've gotten a lot of animated Order 66. We got Jedi Fallen Order 66. Is this the only live action outside of Revenge of the Sith?
Well,
There's
I
also the
think so.
Mandalorian one with Grogu.
there's some but
Yeah, it's a little bit.
I will say also the connections to Force Unleashed. I'm not a big video game guy, but I'm familiar. Whenever those video games come out, I always look to see if there's something I need to know. The video games, I don't play them, but I look to see. And the fact that they connected that whole the underwater prison thing to that video game was pretty cool. Like I'm
Fallen
sure
Order. That's from Fallen Order.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Fallen Order.
Yeah, it doesn't reflect well on the Empire though, because it's like Fallen Order would have been like 5 years before that. So they let 2 Jedi invade the Inquisitor fortress within 5 years.
Well, who would expect that to
I hadn't
happen?
thought about it that way.
Right? I mean, come on.
But I was like, I remember some of the people's complaints about like them sneaking around and sort of the incompetence to the Empire. I'm like, they were pretty incompetent on the Death Star.
Yeah, exactly. Obi-Wan literally is sneaking around on the Death Star the same way, even in a more obvious way, because he's like a little old man and big
In a bathrobe.
Yeah, and what we learn later is he's wearing Jedi robes.
Yeah.
But no one knew what those were anymore.
Like, what?
Right.
Yeah, and I will say, spoiler alert, because I have a feeling that Issa and David are never going to play Jedi Fallen Order. This is a full circle thing that ties into a lot of things we've said about Book of Boba Fett and about Obi-Wan. I knew that Darth Vader appeared in Fallen Order, which he does. And I had reservations about it because it's like, if he's supposed to be, the Jedi killing, Jedi hunting, unstoppable Sith Lord, like, how are you going to fight him in the game? He kicks your ass in the game. So
he's like Jason Voorhees in that game.
yeah, it's like, oh, cool. I'm actually glad that they put him in, because he's in at the very end and he is unbeatable. Like,
you have to run.
After you die quickly multiple times, you finally figure out, like, oh, the game wants me to run away.
The last
you figure that out.
The last little nitpick I have with Obi-Wan before we move on to Tales of the Jedi. I think they missed an amazing opportunity. I love that Qui-Gon came back in at the end, right? That was what we were building to. He had to get through that grief so he could communicate with Qui-Gon. However, when he was underneath the rock and Anakin seemingly had defeated him and he was down there, that was the perfect time for him to first hear Qui-Gon's voice.
And we talked about this before. The reason they couldn't, I guarantee they planned it that way. And then someone said, wait a minute, this is exactly what Spider-Man did with Iron Man when he was buried under stuff. We can't do that. Like, I guarantee that happened. It's the same scene. So they have to change it.
I actually did want to draw attention to that scene. I wanted to say that scene was one of my favorite moments in Obi-Wan, is that despite missing that opportunity, like, I really like that Luke and Leia are the ones that, like, bring him back up, build his hope back up, build his faith back up, and make him able to, like, come back at Vader and just destroy him. Right.
And then, but the connection with Qui-Gon there, and that was what, we needed that for the connection with Qui-Gon. The scene, the actual Liam Neeson of it was maybe a little cheesy, but one thing that I do love is that Liam Neeson has voiced Qui-Gon in the cartoons
consistently.
And I heard that it's because he is militant that no one else play Qui-Gon. Like,
the only other person to play Qui-Gon now is his son.
Yeah, that is and he, like, it doesn't matter if it's cartoons, whatever. He is militant about it, and I really appreciate that. That he doesn't want anyone else.
I like that he shows up for it, which makes it all the more frustrating that we didn't get a Qui-Gon scene in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah,
they shot it, but they didn't use it, and
they shot it. It's in the novelization. It's in comic adaptation. There's a whole conversation between Yoda and Qui-Gon.
Yeah, and right, and it's actually a good scene in the novel, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I liked it. And then but there was a lot of stuff in the cutting room floor for Revenge of the Sith that was good. There was the Mon Mothma meeting too. We're getting that paid off now in Andor, so it's whatever. Anyways, and then so we got this paid off in Obi-Wan, and that's good. So Okay, anything else on Obi-Wan before we move to Tales of the Jedi? Okay.
Oh.
Now, Tales of the Jedi. Obviously, Dave Filoni just basically said, "Hey, I know there's some money laying around, and there's like some connective tissue I really want to make in the cartoons." And specifically, I think he wanted to do the Dooku thing. He's never going to not do Ahsoka, so we're going to get some more Ahsoka. And I know that they're kind of loosely connected in all these. Issa, is this the first time you've watched any Star Wars cartoons?
It is. Yes.
Any of the Dave Filoni? This is the first time. Okay.
This was my first Star Wars cartoon. I think I've tried to watch a couple episodes of Clone Wars, like with my kids at some point, and no one was into it, and we never kept watching. So, yes, this was my first Star Wars cartoon, and I really enjoyed it. So, well done for making me watch it.
Right. And are you happy you watched it? I'm just
wondering. Oh, I loved it. The best part about it was that it was so short, and that sounds insulting, but I don't mean it that way. But it was like, it was a couple 15-minute episodes. It was like, it wasn't trying to tell like a whole story in and of itself. It was just like scenes essentially. And I thought that worked really well. And in a way, it sort of bridges the gap. It introduced me to some characters I didn't know and kind of ties some stuff together. So it was really good.
Well, and they had to answer Yaddle. Yaddle was a thing that people wanted to know. Why was she in Phantom Menace and then suddenly gone? So, it's the funny little things that Dave Filoni's like, I got to answer this.
And in Robot Chicken, Yaddle spoke just like Yoda, but we've now learned that was incorrect. Now we really don't know why Yoda speaks the way he does, because it's not like a cultural thing. She just speaks.
I suspect
like Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yeah, she speaks like.
I suspect the reason Yaddle wasn't in Attack of the Clones is just because George didn't want to have to animate another one.
I don't know if this gets rid of my fan theory that that Grogu is the secret love child of Yoda and Yaddle. I thought
he's 50 years old, right? So he's still within the right age.
Right. So here's the thing. Like, I'm not saying, Issa, you need to go and watch all of the Clone Wars necessarily. Sure. And certainly
let us make you a list.
Yeah, but there are certain arcs in Clone Wars that are really, really
Disney
really
Plus even has an essential episodes playlist in the menu.
I feel like I have a lot of
things I would add to that they don't have in it, but I just know.
I think they have like an Ahsoka list probably.
They do, and they have a Mandalorian culture episodes that it pulls from Clone Wars and Rebels.
Okay, I will probably get around to it someday.
Yeah, I personally love the Clone Wars. I think that last season where they like solved where was Ahsoka on Revenge of the Sith was really good and important. And I personally think the Bad Batch is great. And if you don't know, the Bad Batch is a cartoon about the clone troopers who didn't follow Order 66 and kind of are like the seeds of rebels. And they have this very interesting storyline that connects to Geonosis. It's fun. It's fun Star Wars stuff.
They're called the Bad Batch, you said, because they were clones that like didn't come out right. So each of them has like a weird defect, which they're kind of like the X-Men, because each of their defects is like kind of a character defining superpower in a way. Like one's a really good tracker, one's really strong, but he's dumb. It's fun.
Sure. Okay.
They're a little bit like the A-Team.
Okay.
And I wish it was a little bit more A-Team too.
Did they escape from a top secret Imperial prison or anything? Or?
Kind of.
I mean, kind of. Yeah, actually.
I never thought of the A-Team connection, but it's kind of
it is very
well, now I want to watch it,
because they're on the run from the Empire, but they're also stopping to like help people.
Oh, yeah, they're mercenaries.
Yeah, they're like,
it is the A-Team.
Yeah,
we just cracked it. But with Tales now, Downey, what were your thoughts on Tales of the Jedi?
As we've established on this episode, I am a mark for Dave Filoni. So love that anytime they give him an opportunity to play, and this is the format that we know him best from. These are some of the characters that he handled best. I thought it was great. He wrote all but one of the episodes, Choices, which was the Dooku and Mace Windu episode. I love all these great voice actors that we got back from Clone Wars and Rebels, who did Obi-Wan and Mace Windu and Count Dooku, and of course, me being a massive fan of the great Christopher Lee. One of my favorite things about the Clone Wars is what they were able to do with that character in his absence, because he of course passed away. But yeah, I loved all those episodes, some more than others. I liked let's see, my favorite episode is that it's called The Sith Lord, I think, which is the episode with Yaddle and Dooku and Sidious, and we revisit that location from the end of Attack of the Clones, where we learned that Dooku was Sidious's new apprentice. Yeah, I love that episode. I liked all of it. And I am curious, definitely. You know, I haven't read much Star Wars. I have a few of the books, and one of them is the Ahsoka book. And what's interesting about that last episode is I know there's people online complaining that it contradicts some elements in there, just as there were when they did the final season of the Clone Wars, that there was some contradictory stuff about Ahsoka and Maul and Rex and all of that. But I see this more as like, I don't know, it's kind of adapting the Ahsoka book. And sometimes in adaptations, you improve things and lose things. I don't know. I'm not that upset by it, but I know that there is a fear out there that if we're going to start contradicting books, that it's sort of like undermining, people are going to stop caring about the books and their canonicity as it is. So
it's not that far off from the book. I don't know. I mean,
we're talking like minor details, right?
Yeah, well, it's like she was on she was kind of on the same type of planet and the same type of thing. And for me, it was just kind of a certain point of view type of thing. But as far as and I haven't read the Ahsoka novel. I'll admit to that. I just know about it because some of the novels. I
started it and didn't finish it. So.
Yeah. My personal feeling is that for the Star Wars novels, it depends who's writing them, whether I can hang. And like, for example, anything Claudia Gray does in Star Wars is great.
And Filoni signed off on the Ahsoka book, as I understand it, back when he didn't think he would have a chance to revisit any of that stuff.
Yes. And if anyone, especially people who are fans of Andor, like Claudia Gray did a kind of a YA Star Wars novel called Lost Stars that kind of follows, two friends, and one joins the Empire and one joins the Rebellion. And it's just kind of like, it's one of the best Star Wars novels I've read. It's just really cleverly written. And Claudia Gray also, she did a fantastic novel about a teenage Leia who's just dealing with the politics. And if you think because I heard that concept, I was like, I'm not that into it, but Claudia Gray won me over with her work. So I was like, I'm going to see what she does. And she's able to make books like that, really be interesting and work. And another Claudia Gray one I would recommend to people, she did one that takes place in the sequel era called Bloodlines that is about the galaxy figuring out that Leia is the daughter of Vader, and how it affects the politics of the new Republic. And
that one really kind of explains why she's on the outs.
Yeah, it explains why she's kind of off fighting a resistance and why people might not respond to a message from Leia asking for help at the end of The Last Jedi. And it's very good, adds to the canon. And I know some people don't like the Chuck Wendig Aftermath books, but I think they're great. I think they're fantastic. And
and that's filling in post Return of the Jedi, pre Force Awakens.
Yes, it's
that's right after Return of the Jedi.
Right after Return of the Jedi Aftermath stuff. And he introduced characters that have been put into the Mandalorian and stuff like that, like Timothy Oliphant's character in Mando.
Oh, okay.
Was invented in the Chuck Wendig. Because in the Chuck Wendig novels and Aftermath, there's all these vignettes of what's happening around the galaxy as the Empire falls. And he was one of those vignettes, right?
Oh, okay.
For example, I'm just giving these examples to show you how the literary universe kind of plays with these things too. It's very similar to how Filoni does in the cartoons,
Mhm.
right?
I did do one other book, which is Dooku Jedi Lost, which only exists as an audiobook. And so I just was able to listen to it in the car. And I didn't think any of the Dooku stuff in Tales of the Jedi contradicted any of that. I thought it lined up pretty well. That book tells basically the story of, it's basically Dooku's entire origin up to him leaving the Order, but it doesn't get into him, becoming a Sith Lord or anything. So
I don't, Dawud, do you think I missed any of the really important new Disney canon ones? Because those are the ones that I personally really like, that I think people should check out.
Well, I think the High Republic in general is worth checking out.
I read the
but
first
that has-
High Republic novel. I haven't read
Yeah.
beyond that. I'm going to at some point.
Yeah.
And I cloned
I think-
a reader for myself.
Ironically, like Claudia Gray, her YA novel is really good in that one. And it hits on like the larger stuff, but it's a smaller scale story.
And the High Republic has a Wookiee Jedi.
That it does.
It does.
I was going to say, in relation to how the Aftermath trilogy seeds stuff in those little interludes that get picked up in other places. There's a book that recently came out by, I think it's Adam Christopher, called Shadow of the Sith. And it's about Luke and Lando essentially trying to find Rey and her parents, like when before she's abandoned on Jakku. And it picks up with there's a character that was in a vignette in the Aftermath trilogy that was part of this cult that collected Sith artifacts, thinking they would give them power or something. And this character has power from a mask, a Sith, like a cult mask, right?
Right.
And
you want to hear something funny about this one, Dawud? Is that I started listening to this one on audiobook.
Yeah.
And I couldn't take it because of how connected it was to Rise of Skywalker.
I think it makes it a little better, but it could use some more.
It was forcing me to consider Rise of Skywalker to exist. And I like to think that the saga ended with Last Jedi. And so for me, I tried listening to that book and I was just like, oh no, I can't.
I'm so uncomfortable with the whole concept of like, well, this movie had these problems, but this other thing fixes it. Like, I'm just not comfortable with that. Like, I get that there's like this whole universe of stuff, but all this retconning, trying to improve stuff, it just doesn't sit well with me.
I feel like that's like everything about Star Wars right now. Like not just right now, but like for the last 30 years at least.
Yeah.
Like Star Wars is like, here's a movie, here's another movie, here's another movie, here's how we fill in the gaps, and here's how we make it better. Like Clone Wars essentially is like, here's how to make the prequel trilogy so much better.
But even like going back and adding scenes to like previous to new edits of old movies, you know what I mean? Like that whole the philosophy of just like we're remaking this for whoever's starting now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's very different from how most things go, and I don't love it. Like it might just be that someone new who's never seen Star Wars before, who starts watching all of it now, is like, oh yeah, this all fits together great, you know. But as someone who's been watching it in real time, it's weird to then go back and say, oh well, you should have seen this scene in 1977, you know, or like whatever.
It's interesting because my son and I rewatched the first Iron Man a couple nights ago for the first time in a really long time. And it's interesting that the MCU hasn't taken that Lucasfilm track at all, because watching that, all the flashbacks of Howard Stark are neither of the actors that play Howard Stark later as the MCU unfolded. And it's interesting because it seems like it would be pretty easy for them to go back and replace those couple of scenes continuity wise, but
they could have replaced Brody at any time too.
They just keep putting out good movies and they don't have to go back and fix them. We might get this, you know, a couple the TV shows I haven't been very thrilled with the TV shows, but whatever.
I think that opens an interesting space for them to deviate, to keep on this little wandering, I guess. But if the Daredevil that they're bringing into the TV space again is supposed to be the same as the Netflix Daredevil, then they can always just recast Iron Fist and still kind of pretend that they're the same.
Yeah, totally.
Well, look, and the reason why I brought up Bloodlines, for example, the Claudia Gray novel, is that I actually thought that storyline just made the sequel trilogy work better. It added to it. Now the Clone Wars, the same thing. Like, it's funny because, for example, in Clone Wars, there's like the storyline with Yoda and the whole arc where he's leading the clone troopers on that battle is like it was the early first time that the Clone Wars show like really like added to me, like it made Yoda's position in that era, like, he's a real commander, he's like a real person who leads troops into battle and does all that, and so it adds to it. And I get it that you shouldn't have to have the cartoons, the movies should work on their own. But at the same time, like, if you're just a person that wants more Star Wars, why not enjoy like deepening that world, right?
Yeah.
And I'm fine with it, but at the same time, like, the movies have to work on their own. But like, and I think the original trilogy does work on its own, but Obi-Wan adds to it. The original trilogy works on its own, but the prequels add to it.
I think the prequels made the original trilogy worse. Like that.
I know you feel that way, and I'm not saying you're wrong. For me personally, I don't feel that way. And I think, it's interesting. What next time we'll be talking about Andor, and it's interesting to see because it's Star Wars diving into real life politics again, which is something that people did not like about the prequels, but we're
I mean, the prequels, I feel like a lot of stuff could be forgiven. It's just all of it can't be forgiven. Like,
yeah,
if there was like a lot of political stuff that wasn't very interesting, but there wasn't like spinning's a good move, I'm going to try spinning, then maybe like I would forgive one of those. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like all
Jar Jar and all that.
Yeah, and Jar Jar and this and the robots and all the, there was just so many things that were dumb that it was hard to and leaving Anakin's mother a slave, and there are 1,000 things that just didn't make any sense in the movie. So it's hard to pick on the politics particularly.
I don't know. I think leaving her a slave spoke well to how rigid and dogmatic the Jedi Order had become, and
which led to their downfall.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
What's interesting about that is I think in the
leaving her an enslaved person. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah. In the pre-Disney expanded universe materials, as I understand it, I don't think I ever read a source directly on this, but there was like a storyline where Qui-Gon had sort of sent Temple money to be used to pay for Anakin's mom's freedom.
And that's how she ended up with
that's
Lars.
Yeah. Now they've done something else.
It was very prime directive to leave her in.
They've done something else now where it's Padme that's kind of responsible for it. So she sends one of her handmaids, which I think it was like the one that Keira Knightley played, to Tatooine to get involved with, I haven't read the book, but it's like to initially check up on Anakin's mom's status, but then she gets involved with like the anti-slavery movement on planet. And later that leads to her liberation and then her working in the anti-slavery movement on Tatooine.
And Clone Wars showed us how Anakin feels about slavers.
Sure did.
Yeah.
Watch that, Issa. You gotta watch it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so with Tales of the Jedi, I didn't give my personal feeling. I like that they're short. I like that we got these, more Jedi stories. I thought Dooku dropping that giant door on Yaddle was brutal. And I thought that it showed his fall, kind of like it put it into stark terms. I thought it was funny that it answered, where Yaddle went from being this background character in Phantom Menace, because Star Wars fans need to know why this character was sitting there in Phantom Menace, but not there at Attack of the Clones. So like 20 years later, we get a cartoon.
And we also know why nobody went looking for her, because she says that she left the Jedi Order. She left the council. She tells Dooku that. So
yeah,
also explains
when they quit, they just go, oh, they're done.
Yeah, but why are Jedis all such bad tacticians? Like, she pushes open first of all, she sees them and she's like, oh yeah, I'll just convince Dooku to join me and it'll be cool, right? Why didn't she just leave and go get the rest of the Jedi and call for help, right?
Well,
then she open the door and falls into the room with the Sith instead of just falling out of the room with the Sith.
Well, that's why Luke Skywalker in Last Jedi is so great, because he talks about Jedi arrogance, because a lot of it was the arrogance that the Jedi had for so long that caused their downfall.
Like one of the great lines that actually is in the prequels is when Mace Windu says, Count Dooku is a political, they're like, he's a political idealist. I think Ki-Adi-Mundi says that, and Mace Windu's like, he couldn't assassinate anybody. It's not in his character. So that's their arrogance, to where they're like, yeah, Dooku disagrees with us on stuff and we disagree with him, but he's like basically one of us. He couldn't possibly. So yeah, so it makes sense. I think that Yaddle would think like, oh, he's gonna take my side. This should be pretty easy.
Okay, and for the I like that Dooku had to then, sort of like killing in the heat of battle, and then had to kill her in cold blood to be even more evil. Like that was a nice touch. I sort of
very
felt
much mirroring the fall of Anakin, right?
Yeah,
it
would have been kind of cool to be like, hey, I don't want to kill you a little bit, but it was just like, okay, yeah, I gotta kill you, but that's fine.
Well, and look, Issa, if you like lightsabers, like some of the best lightsaber stuff happens in the cartoons. Gotta tell you, like
I don't like
absolutely.
I don't like cartoon lightsabers. That doesn't do it for me.
One of the sickest lightsaber duels is Darth Sidious versus Darth Maul and Maul's brother.
Yeah. And
in all of Star Wars, and also there's a Maul versus Ahsoka in the final season where Ray Park actually came and did the mocap for the anime.
Right, and then you also have like the force sensitive witches on Dathomir. Like there's some really cool stuff in the Clone Wars. Really.
Clone Wars kind of starts that. Maul's just alive.
Okay. I learned that from Solo, which I did not. I didn't enjoy Solo very much.
Yeah, and that's a terrible way to learn it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah,
I feel like that was done to reward all. I think it was a way to both reward and also to send people scurrying to all of the other mediums. Because I think the hope was that someone in the audience would be like, what? That's ridiculous. Maul's alive. And then their friend next to him goes, well, actually, if you watch the cartoons and read the comics.
That is literally the conversation I had. So it worked,
Yeah.
All right. Well, to wrap things up, I hope that we will all reconvene for Andor. And then we'll have some other shows in the future. I think Mandalorian season 3 is going to be after Andor.
Bad Batch season 2, I think, is January.
Yeah. And Issa, I won't expect you to show up for the cartoons, but I will expect you.
Don't count me out. Let me know, and maybe we'll see. Because I've finally been watching the X-Men cartoon from the 90s because I got one of my daughters into it. And it's awful, and I think everyone loves it because they were just little kids when they saw it, but it is, as a huge X-Men fan, it is terrible, but whatever.
And it's coming back.
I know.
Hopefully with better animation.
I don't even mind the animation or whatever. It's such someone had told me, I was like, I don't understand why they keep making these bad X-Men movies. All they have to do is do X-Men like 94 to 200, and it'll be like the best series of movies ever. And someone was like, oh yeah, just watch the X-Men cartoon. It's just like that. And I'm like, no, it's not. So, I'm a little angry about that. Whatever. Anyway, we'll watch more of the cartoon.
There's a
cartoon is more like Jim Lee's X-Men #1 to whatever.
Okay. Well,
the cartoon's very Jubilee heavy.
Oh yeah, totally. They replaced with Jubilee. Like, come on.
So there's a Star Trek fan who's like, he and his wife are really into the Star Trek animated series from the 70s. And he's been making these YouTube videos where he takes some of the classic moments of like he did Best of Both Worlds from Next Generation and made it in the 70s animation style. And it went viral, of course. And there's a famously most hated episode of Star Trek Voyager called Threshold. And he remade that episode in the animated series style. And
does he just use the voice,
he uses the same voice track from the show. And since that episode was written by Brandon Braga, I was able to send it to him over email. And it was funny because it was like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and he wrote me back like, that's the best version that could ever be made of that. And he's really proud of the fact that he flew too close to the sun on that episode of Voyager. And but seeing it animated, he was like super stoked. I would love to see, I'm sure some people would, Star Wars fans do the fan edits and all that, so it's kind of similar thing. But we have plenty of. The thing is, we have more Star Wars animated content, but I do like that Star Trek is making Prodigy for kids, and I do love Prodigy more so than I do Lower Decks. I know some of you are huge Lower Decks fans on this panel, but
I love Lower Decks.
Yeah, I admit I am not, but
David, we can't not talk about the first episode when they murder that poor little deer-like creature or whatever.
Oh,
Yeah, bringing us full circle. That's because we kind of kicked off talking about that or hinting at it.
yes, that was
start
hard
off
for
like
me to
you
watch.
gotta respect
It's
life.
a hunting episode.
Yeah.
See, that was before she became a Jedi, right?
Yeah, I didn't know who she was. I was like, oh, these people must be Siths.
But Ahsoka also befriends that beast. So
Right.
Yeah.
That's part of the arc, right? So she does. Yeah, and that was before she became a Jedi. And I did love that episode. Love one thing about that episode was I love the scene when the elder came and says she's a Jedi. That was great. I've always kind of wanted to see that scene and how it happened for Obi-Wan, and we got hints of it in the show when he mentioned that he had a brother.
oh gosh, and that I did roll my eyes at that just because it felt like one comment that was planted to create like a bunch more stuff. You know what I mean? Like now we're gonna get
you know what it is like so in the 80s novelization of Return of the Jedi, it says that Owen Lars is Obi-Wan's brother.
Wow.
So that's like a little nod to that.
Huh. Okay. Oh, one thing we didn't talk about is what we'd want to see in a new Star Wars thing or whatever. And I just want to say I would like to see Sebastian Stan play a live-action Luke Skywalker and make a movie about that. Pick your era. I don't even care. I think he'd be perfect for it.
I think it's got to be that would have to be like a post Return of the Jedi era Luke Skywalker, because you want to know what he's doing.
Yeah, totally.
And the deep fakery, it's uncanny valley at best,
I agree. I would much rather see a new actor do it.
I think with the deep fakery, we gotta teach this generation. Well, I guess it's our generation too. People need to just be grown-ups. Like grow up, suspend your disbelief, understand that this is a different actor playing the same character.
Yeah.
Soap operas have been doing it for decades,
and because Solo wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be, I think it scared them off of that.
Yeah, that was
and it's just so funny to see them say like, "We learned our lesson. No more new actors playing old characters," and it's like
that wasn't the problem with Solo.
And they said that about Obi-Wan. They were like, "We're bringing back Hayden and Ewan because no more." It's like they're both
new actors.
Years ago, that's what they were, Yeah,
exactly.
Well,
I mean, you just watched Iron Man, who played Rhodey, like who cares?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't. Yeah. Gosh, were we supposed to have that's Howard for the rest of all the Marvel movies?
Yeah,
that drives me nuts when people are like, "Why is Pike's quarters so big on the Enterprise and Strange New World? Like Kirk's quarters were like this big," and it's like, use your fucking imagination and just enjoy
that
it.
is endlessly frustrating. I agree, and it's
budgets, and 50 years later, it's something else, man. Like, come on, like.
Yeah, use your imagination. Kirk's quarters were always that big; you just couldn't tell.
Why did people from other starships have different different symbols than the Federation symbol? Yeah, use your imagination.
Well,
I think now they're like they all have different uniforms now.
Yeah.
Well, and if they were going to be really tight about canon, like if you read because now that I'm reading all the memos, the production memos, they were very clear that there were only 12 ships in Starfleet in the memos, like, and
What a fleet.
and also they were constantly reminding writers that they only had 2 tricorders, so stop writing so many tricorders into scenes. For example, really
not everybody can have one.
Yeah. There's one for in a letter to Norman Spinrad, who wrote Doomsday Machine, because he wrote in the landing party that when they beamed over to the other ship, that everyone pulled out their tricorders, and they like literally wrote there are only 2 tricorders, like which is hilarious.
We can't build more.
Right. So on that note, for what I want, and I'm kind of maybe what I would love to, because I'm a writer, so I would love to write this, but I would love to see a Star Wars movie or show that was a spot that blended the spy story of Andor, but moved a little bit into the Jedi like Force realm. Sorry, barking dog. And I always see this as I would love to remake the Clint Eastwood movie Firefox in Star Wars, where they're like building this like crazy TIE fighter that only Darth Vader can fly because you need force sensitivity to fly it. And they have to take a fallen Jedi to break into the headquarters and steal this before they take it out. And that would make an amazing.
There have been a lot of Clint Eastwood references today.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the Star Wars series I want, because I think I would like to see them blend the realism of Andor, like getting towards where we have more like Force stuff. And if you had like a fallen Jedi who survived Order 66 because he left the Order, and he's the one person that can break in and take this thing, then you can meld those worlds, and you can do it with anybody, but and that way you could eventually do lightsabers and also have a like American style spy story. That's what I would like to see. So
I could see that being like a good entry for like some Inquisitor stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And then because I love this, I like the idea that because I kept thinking like, well, why didn't they whenever they showed like Darth Vader's individual TIE fighter that's different, I kept thinking like, well, what makes it different? And I had my thought like, well, a force sensitive pilot's always going to be able to fly a little differently. And what if they built something that was like that geared to that? And that's kind of and then it made me think of Firefox, because that whole movie is about the Russians developing a plane that thinks that flies with your thoughts to a degree. It's really stupid, but great. Like 80s movie.
Another Star Wars thing that I thought got a little bit ruined from the original series was that the whole like no one believes in your ancient religion anymore kind of thing. That was kind of a cool thing, and now it's just like, well, how come everyone doesn't believe in the Force since it's always everywhere? Like that's
more a problem with how they shortened the length of time.
Yeah,
between them, which I just kind of go with it, but
yeah.
I mean, they have like in comics and stuff tried to work on sort of building that out a little more, in that like the Empire basically has a policy of repression of anything to do with the Force.
Right.
So like there's a comic storyline sort of set between Empire and Jedi, and it brings back the Emilia Clarke's character Kira, like from Solo, into the mix. So she's there like messing with the rebels and leading that criminal empire, Crimson Dawn, and she steals like Han frozen in carbonite from Boba for a little while, and tries to auction him off to the Empire because she's got a axe to grind against the Empire. But there's another character in that who's this weird Force historian, and you get into a little flashback about how the Empire like repressed her and anybody and anything to do with the Force in between prequel and original trilogy. So, but that's sort of like Rogue One gets a little iffy then, because they go to a whole planet that's a mecca basically.
They do blow it up, though.
They do blow it up.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Dawud, what do you want to see Star Wars do?
Honestly, I'd like to see them depart from the Skywalker saga era entirely. Whether that's going backwards in time
Not backwards, forwards in time, please.
Well, they can go back far enough where they have more freedom to tell you more. Say, like, we could learn more about the Sith and Jedi war.
Okay.
That sets all this stuff up. They could do stuff in the High Republic. I think the Acolyte series that's in product or in development right now is kind of at the tail end of that setting. Or they could jump way ahead post Rise of Skywalker. I don't even know if I would do anything with those actors. Like, they may have been burned on the experience so far anyway.
Or if those actors will do anything.
Yeah, it sounds like John Boyega is feeling pretty burned, you know. But go forward. Let's see what happens like 100, 200 years later.
But I also wouldn't mind a contemporary story anywhere in the timeline that's just about a different part of the galaxy and different characters. You know, like I think that would be fun too.
Which I think that was the idea for the Rian Johnson trilogy, which I'm sure isn't ever going to happen.
Yeah.
He says it's not dead. We'll see. See how many fucks he gives about what people say about him. But
yeah,
let's see how Knives Out 2 does.
Bernard Downey, what do you got? What do you want out of Star Wars? More cartoons?
I want to see a long time ago catch up to the modern era so we can do like a Battlestar 1980. No, I'm just kidding. What I want actually
Battlestar 1980 is a reference that is pretty deep.
Wait, you mean Galactica 1980?
Galactica 1980, yeah.
I have never seen that, and I've only seen a little of the original Battlestar.
It's holiday special bad.
Immediately go watch it after this. It's
That's what I've always heard.
It's like when Dukes of Hazzard lost Bo and Luke and got
the season that was the cousins.
Corey and Vance, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
It's almost that good. They replaced Starbuck and Apollo with two new guys, and it's great.
But the setup was that the Galactica got to Earth, and it was modern day Earth, and it's just like, you know,
these guys have this against the side.
So they're like, here's Battlestar Galactica in like Southern California in 1980.
Yeah.
So they could save money. Yeah. Because the thing was, NBC said it's too expensive, so figure out a way to make it cheaper. And they're like,
do they encounter punks?
Yeah, they probably do. I can't say that I
remember. But my thing's a real thing, and as a writer, I would love to tackle. So you know how Rogue One all sprung from just a line in an opening crawl, right? About, you know, stealing the secrets for the Death Star. A line that I think has never been explored. Well, I take that back because I know it's been explored kind of in little bits and pieces, but really fully fleshed out is in the opening crawl for Revenge of the Sith. It talks about the Clone Wars, and it says there are heroes on both sides. All we've seen from the Separatists are Dooku, who we know is a Sith Lord, and a bunch of droids and some, like, you know, evil Trade Federation, like super villains. Like they're all clearly villains. I would love to see it fleshed out of political idealists and fighters, warriors, whatever, on the side of the Confederacy, who had legitimate grievances with the Galactic Senate, with the Republic, with the Jedi, who, unbeknownst to them that they're all puppets of Darth Sidious, are fighting for the Confederacy and the Separatists.
Sorry, that was just very Spaceballs, like unbeknownst to them, but beknownst to.
But beknownst.
This is happening in Andor a little bit.
It is. There's a novel that came out recently too called Brotherhood. That's about Obi-Wan and Anakin, like right after Attack of the Clones, and it gets into it. It riffs off of the like throwaway line in Revenge of the Sith, like that business on Cato and Nemoidia doesn't count. Like, so it gets into what that business was, and it sort of presents a situation where not all the Nemoidian people are separatists, and they're not like, and I guess like the Trade Federation isn't officially part of the separatists, but it does get into how the Nemoidians have beef with the galaxy at large because there's a lot of racial stereotypes about who they are because of the Trade Federation and the like money grubbing corporatist thing. That's right. Nice. So Yeah, it's like they're like, we have all this amazing art, and like
Yeah,
you just
I thought
don't
it
appreciate
was
it.
Watto who was money grubbing.
There's that too.
The trade Federation are World War II Japanese villains.
Yeah,
Well-
I mean, there's that. Yeah.
Well, look, if Dave Filoni is out there listening because Ryan defends him all the time, we're available to write these episodes.
Yeah.
These
Come get
shows,
us.
movies. Yes, come.
I want to do some heroes on both sides. I want to see what a hero of the Separatists looks like.
Yeah.
They touched that a little bit in the Clone Wars with the like will they won't they boyfriend character for Ahsoka.
Yeah.
His mom, I think, was a senator that was part of the Confederacy, but that ultimately was like they're still pretty bad. Like these characters are good, but the leaders of the Confederacy are bad.
And Forrest Whitaker and his one amazing scene a couple weeks ago in Andor that he did mention. He mentioned all these factions in one way or another.
I want to see Forrest Whitaker go from what he looks like there to what he looks like in Rogue One. And this one last thing about Tales of the Jedi that I meant to mention as a big Dooku fan. Man, Dooku still had brown hair and a brown beard at the end of the Phantom Menace, and by Attack of the Clones is full gray. Like
The dark side does a
Yeah,
number
the
on
dark
you,
side.
apparently. You know what I thought was interesting about the Dooku episodes, honestly, was that like it takes. I always thought of him because of this contemporary release of these movies, right? Like I always thought Dooku is the Saruman of Star Wars. Now I think he's like, what if Gandalf turned evil?
Interesting.
Because his ideals are sound, at least when
They
he
started
starts
that way,
off.
but then we see him do. But
Bad,
that's the
bad
dark
stuff.
side, right? Then that's the dark side that just makes it.
Yeah.
I just like that as a Star Wars type nerd. I still think that Lord of the Rings people are like extra nerdy. So I'm just going to throw that out
They are.
there.
And more racist.
I was gonna say, and more racist. which
More
is
racist than the Star Wars fandom?
hard.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they found a way to do
You know
that.
who loves Lord of the Rings? Burzum. Enough
Mhm.
said.
Yeah, that's true.
That
All
I
right,
believe Burzum is a word from Lord of the Rings.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we went hard on Star Wars, and we had a couple shows to catch up on. So next time, but Andor, we're gonna have a lot to chew on with Andor. Issa hasn't seen any of it. The rest of us, I'm sure,
I'm
are
gonna
watching
watch
as it goes. I actually do like to watch week to week. I'm a person that likes little small bits being fed out. And I like speculating over the week, and it's fine. But here's the weird thing about Andor for me is I never think about Andor until it's time to watch the next one. I do a little bit because I do think that I love it. Don't get me wrong. I think Andor is the best thing to happen to Star Wars since Rogue One. And it's interesting because when they announced Andor, my first thought was I would give a toe to write for that show. And I'm more thinking I would give a toe to write for season 2 because I like what they're doing with season 1 of Andor, but I think season 2 is going to be more. And I do think, and one thing that we'll get to when we do talk about Andor is Tony Gilroy is full of shit when he says that he doesn't give a shit about canon or Easter eggs because there's still a lot of canon and Easter eggs in there, and it may be people advising him. Sorry, I got dogs yelling. They're saying, "Shut up! Quit talking about Star Wars." But my feeling is that Andor. Well, anyways, we're gonna have a lot to talk about with Andor because there's a lot to really pull apart with that. I'm excited to hear what Issa thinks when he gets there. I imagine the three of us that have seen Andor are all pleased so far, right? I mean,
It's my favorite live action Star Wars TV.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say that it's my favorite. And I think part of this is from my reticence with like some of the early reaction where people are like, it's so good because it's not Star Warsy. And it's being Blade Runner. And I was like, I'm over that kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to hear that Star Wars is good when it's not being Star Wars.
Right.
Well,
right.
the
Right.
Andor
Or
reaction
people that
is-
are like, this superhero movie's good because it's so dark and gritty. Like,
Yeah, it's not a superhero movie.
I think it's more
really.
challenging now to do Captain America. You know what I mean? Or to do a good Superman.
Yeah, I think it would be more challenging to do a Batman that's like very, very comic booky and almost like Adam West than like what they've done now, where
It goes
everybody's
like, I'm sure
aping.
you've seen that meme that was like Andor if it was done by Dave Filoni.
Yes, I posted that too. Yeah, that was great. Well, and here's the thing. I think the Andor is so great because it's not Star Wars, is the Star Trek. The Star Trek equivalent is that saying that the Orville is the best new Star Trek show, right?
Yeah,
Same.
I love the Orville for the Orville.
Yes, and I love Andor for Andor, and I like that we're getting different shades, and that's a good thing.
And Picard is not Trek, and that's why it's terrible.
You know,
I like the
with
first season
Andor,
of Picard, but season 2.
I love
Season
Picard.
two was-
all of that all the time because I just love all the characters. So
I hate it so much.
All right.
the one thing I'll say about Andor, real quick, is I think they might benefit from changing the release structure a little bit. I think if you did like drops of the 3-episode arcs, it might be a little better than doing it week to week.
Week to week is the worst. It's evil. It's like going back in time. It's a mistake.
I think that works for some shows. Mandalorian it works for because it's episodic.
I feel like with the Disney Plus Marvel shows, it's this like false sense of importance that I think undermines those shows, because I think they're like, this is so great, you only get one a week. And it's
when you can watch it all at once,
great.
It's not, the boring parts aren't as boring, and it's more one thing. It's just better.
And the Netflix Daredevil was my favorite live action superhero Marvel thing ever. So
I'm right there with you.
And those were all binge.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So if people want to find you, I know Issa, you don't want people to find you.
I don't want people to find me, but I'm only on Facebook. If you want to find me on Facebook, I'm easy to find. But
Dawud?
The only thing I'll really say is that I have an Instagram page called @JediSufism, where I do sometimes I do a little toy photography and throw in a little Sufi wisdom quote here and there, and I play around with the like Jedi fortune cookie thing from Clone Wars, but I make it little spiritual quotes, things like that. So that's my main thing.
And Downey, I need to have you on soon just to talk about Metallica and like what you're doing all the time, just a Downey episode. So we got to do that soon. But tell folks how they can find your many ventures.
You can find me on Twitter @Ryan Downey, where I am verified without having to pay for
it. For the time being.
And Instagram Ryan J Downey _. Yeah.
Well, and you should promote you do the Metallica podcast.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Actually, if you go to ryanjdowney.com, you can find all my various shenanigans. There's Speaking Story, which is the Metallica podcast that David mentioned, and there's another podcast called No Prize from God, which is conversations with creative people about belief, unbelief, and everything between. I got to have Dawud on that actually to talk about Star Wars and spirituality. But yeah, and then there's always other shenanigans that I'm up to. But Ryan J.
My favorite thing you did on the No Prize from God, there was a guest where you talked about pre-internet gathering spaces, where like we had People's Park in Bloomington and stuff like that. And I remember listening to that episode and being like, and just loving that discussion, because it was talking about how pre-internet you had to find like a space for the weirdos to all meet up. Yeah, and that was great.
Denny's and Perkins.
Yes, I think so. And then
Bridge and Broad Ripple.
Yeah, and you've had some great guests on that podcast. I love that podcast too. So on that note, folks, thank you for listening. If you made it this far, you're a super nerd. You will definitely be back for Andor. So we'll talk to you then. And panel, thanks for joining me. And we'll talk when Andor comes out. So we only have a few weeks, I think. So talk to you then. All right, then, folks. Bye.